Hey everyone, welcome. This is our 23rd episode of the Spiky Signal Show, where I sit down with some of the most exceptional revenue leaders in the revenue space. This podcast is meant for all of us to explore the biggest problems facing customer-facing teams, sharing the real challenges that sales and revenue leaders deal with on an everyday basis, whether it's pipeline visibility, coaching, deal velocity, we share it all here. I'm your host, Wally Chirani, head of revenue over at Spiky.ai, and today I'm here with Ty Arlint, CRO at PeopleOne Health. Today, we're talking about cracking government and health tech sales. This one is pretty an interesting one because I haven't really had anyone that came and talked about, government and health tech sales. So I'm really excited to get into this, Ty. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Waleed. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, why don't you just give us a quick elevator pitch on who you are and what you do?
Sure. As Waleed said, Ty Arlint with PeopleOne Health. I'll say what's interesting for me is my background over the last, call it 20 years or so, has been pretty much focused in the government space. I've done a little bit of private sector as well, but I've had a wide, or I guess a deep domain expertise in the government space. At PeopleOne Health, we are an employer-sponsored direct primary care company. So if an employer wants to bring our benefit into their members, they can have a monthly membership to our direct primary care where we offer everything that you would imagine that would come into primary care, but we also do things like physical therapy and imaging and mental health, behavioral health, cardiovascular, and durable medical equipment, all sorts of things that are included. But we primarily have been starting out selling into the government space, and then we also have some private sector clients as well. So as we enter a region, we sort of expand out into the market, typically starting in the government space and then going all the way throughout private sector as well.
Awesome. Awesome, Ty. And I think before we talked, you mentioned that you had some SaaS selling experience as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I spent probably the first probably 15 years of my career were dedicated on the SaaS side. I worked at a company most of you probably heard of, ADP, and was part of a group that built out the government function there, selling their SaaS solutions for HR and payroll into the government space. I spent 10 years there, and then kind of moved over on the SaaS technology side in the Ben admin space, working for a company called Business Solver, doing the same thing, built out the government function there and grew it over a 5 year period. So yeah, deep domain expertise on the software side, and then moved into healthcare, 4 or 5 years ago, and have been focusing on that side now.
Awesome, awesome. So I guess like what's the biggest difference that you've seen between the two sectors, government, SaaS, and healthcare? It's was there like a particular moment where it was like, yeah, this is nothing like like SaaS at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of there's similarities and differences in both, right? I think number one, when you think about the government side, whether it's the healthcare or the SaaS side, longer buying cycles, more stakeholders, and having to get a wider variety of people engaged in the sale, which inherently makes the sale take longer, and it becomes more complex. But I think the biggest difference I've seen, like from day one, is just the speed of the sale
Hmm.
and everything you have to know going in, right? So in the private side, when you go into a sales cycle, whether it's healthcare or SaaS, you don't have access to a ton of data. So you've got to meet with the client, you've got to meet with their consultant or their broker, and you've got to glean all the information out. Whereas when you go into a public sector sale, everything's public, right? You can go to the budgets, you can go to their benefit plans, you can go to what systems they're using today, and you can generally find it somewhere online. So there's a lot more information you have going into the sale, so you can be better prepared at the end of the day if you know where to find it and if you know how to do the homework. You can gain credibility immediately because you've got all that information and they see that you've done the homework and the research. And when you're walking in, you're an informed seller going to a buyer that is like, wow, these people have done their homework and they know what I'm looking for, right?
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. It's interesting to see that kind of like speed in the space, because like here with Spiky, typically, especially like we're an AI startup, and deal velocity as short as possible would be the best scenario.
Of
Like
course.
sales, right? Timing is everything, right? And
Yeah.
so speed is like the number one thing that we try to get to, but I'm assuming that speed is almost like a liability in kind of like, health tech and government tech, right? It's more so like you need to make sure that you have all the correct data to have an advantage moving on a particular deal, right? Like, would you say that speed is actually a liability instead of an advantage in these markets?
I mean, not in some cases it could be, but not necessarily, right? Because like I'm still one of the believers that like what kills deals is time, right? So if you
Right.
can shorten the timeline, and especially in the government space, like I think about some of the quickest deals that we've had, and I think of some of the longest deals that we've had, right? Like I've had deals that were 2.5 year sales cycles, which is just unheard of, but they're, at the state level, sometimes they move slower. But what kills those deals is you could have regime changes in the middle of it, right? You have a county manager, a mayor, a city manager, a governor, whoever in a cabinet could change mid sales cycle, which when you have a new regime change, that slows and stops everything. So I think where you can speed things up, obviously, I'll do it anytime I can, right? What I've seen from an AI perspective for us that's been able to speed things up is everything on the front end, right? So as we move into a new market, a new region, and we want to figure out who the employers are, how many lives are on the plan, how many people we're going to affect, we're leveraging AI on the front end to really do that early prospecting to raise up some of the prospects that we want and push out the ones that we don't, right? So there's different ways that we can leverage AI to speed that part of the process up. But once we get into a deal, um, especially in the public sector or government side, it's understanding their buying process, understanding what they have to do to buy. Some groups are forced or think they're forced to do an RFP, which that changes the whole dynamic in the process. So there's strategic things you can do. You can get on buying consortiums. Like for example, we're on one called Omnia Partners, which is one of the largest across the country, where they do RFPs for all sorts of things. I think they have tens of thousands of products and solutions that are in their scope of services where they release an RFP. They did one for direct primary care. We responded, we won that bid, and any public entity across the US can buy our solution off that existing RFP. So it saves them potentially 6 months of going out, hiring a consultant, writing the RFP, putting it out there, taking all the bids in, going through them, picking their finalists, and then doing that whole process, right? We can shorten it if we can show them the value we create and that we're the company they want to work with. They can leverage the existing RFP and we can have contracting done in 90 days, right? So like those are some of the things you can do to speed the process up. And oftentimes you're talking to organizations who have never bought off a cooperative, so they don't understand it. So one of my best practices is like literally day one, first meeting, when we go through the process, I walk them through like, hey, here's our sales pitch, if you will. And at the end of the meeting, by the way, we understand that your buying process typically include RFPs, RFIs, RFQs, different things that you have to do to go through the process. We've partnered with this group that's a buying consortium. You're on their contract already buying other services. So should we get down the road and you're interested in us, just know that's an option, right? Planting the seed early so that they understand it. Because if you wait till the very end of the process and you plant that seed, they've likely already said, well, we have to do an RFP, we're doing all these things. And then it's kind of a defensive play, right? So I'd rather be on the offensive and bring it up early.
No, that's awesome, and I totally resonate with that, especially when it comes to even our side when we're selling to the bigger clients. Always an RFP comes into play, and you want to get that as early as possible to make sure that you're hitting on all fronts. Um, what I'm curious about, you mentioned that like it could go as long as 2.5 years. Is there politics involved with like some of these cycles? I can imagine like there's compliances and all these laws coming out every now and then. Is like how many, I guess, invisible stakeholders sit behind all of this, or are you? Because like for our sales cycle, we're selling like for example like to a CRO, and then okay, we're gonna be talking to enablement or revenue operations. We'll probably get budget from finance, CFO, and then that's pretty much it. But I can imagine in the health tech or government space, there's a lot more stakeholders behind that.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of over my career. I've done a lot at the school district level. And I'll give you an example. At the school district level, you have the administrative team. So let's just say you're selling into HR, right? You've got the HR and the benefits team, and then you have the superintendent, and then typically under the superintendent, there's like deputy superintendents that run each division, plus you have a CFO, right? So in the school district itself, you might have 7 to 15 people that are going to be involved. There's no one like decision maker, right? Whereas you go to a public sector or a private sector deal, and it's like, okay, well, this person is the decision maker, and there's going to be a few other people that influence. In the school district system, for example, you might have 7 to 12, 15 people involved, but then you also have a school board, and then potentially you have union leadership.
Hmm.
And if you don't get all of those encompassed and circled in, at any point in time, the deal could stall, be killed. Like if you just don't know the parameters of what's going on, it can be painful, right? And
Yeah.
so politics definitely play. And like when you think about like technology, I go back to my days at ADP. We're selling HR payroll software where it's partially outsourcing as well. You're selling outsourcing to a government, which that doesn't seem to make sense. But when you go into that, right, what's the one thing you can't mess up? Somebody's paycheck, right?
Hmm.
So they're very, very cautious about what technology or what's going to be done in my organization. And, I want to do everything I can to keep my name out of the news, or my city or my county or my state out of the news, right? So we want to do things the right way and make sure that it's all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So it can definitely slow it up. And then, like I said, the regime changes is what the big thing is, like understanding where they are in their political roadmap, right? Like, did we just get a new mayor, or is this mayor term limited, or are they going to be
Hmm.
up for reelection soon? Because if you're approaching an election phase, they're likely not going to make any big changes, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the risk. They're not going to do it, right? So all those things matter. You really have to do your due diligence and understand where they are in their cycles, who all is involved, and what it looks like.
Yeah, that makes sense. The mayor change kind of reminded me of like the CRO as well. Like typically we'll target a CRO that maybe kind of like 3 months into their to the company, because usually when a CRO comes in, they have a strategy of like changing things up, and bringing on new tools also is a part of that strategy. But if you've been there for quite a while, with like an average tenure of CRO being like 15, 18 months, then they're going to be out the door soon. There's no need. They don't want to look at any
Yeah,
new technology. So it definitely makes
yeah,
sense from that perspective.
yeah.
Um, so let's take it a little bit higher level. When it comes to like the lead generation or the top of the funnel, what kind of like go-to-market strategies are succeeding more so in government and health tech versus, SaaS probably has a completely different sales playbook, right? They leverage a bunch of cold outbound. Sometimes they have an army of SDRs just doing outreaches, right? I
Yeah.
doubt that's kind of the same on your guys' side. Is it more so channel partners that you guys leverage more? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's where I'm at now, because and I'll use it this way because we're pretty regionally focused, right? So we're taking a really finite approach on the markets we're in, and we're saying, okay, let's start with what does the target market look like? What is the total addressable market in this region? And then who's doing what from a standpoint of like when you look at healthcare, for example, a big thing we were looking at is budgets, right? We know the average organization employee insurance cost or healthcare cost are rising anywhere from, I would say on the low end 8% to the high end probably 15, 16%, right? That's what people are doing. And what's happened in health tech over the last 4 or 5 years is you've got hundreds of point solutions, right? I mean, there's a point solution for everything: MSK, mental health, diabetes, weight loss. I mean, you name it. There's probably 5 or 6 for each of the categories. So everybody is vying for these people's times. So you have to really pinpoint your messaging on where are their pain points and what's hurting them the most, and what are they looking to achieve, right? Because every point solution out there is guaranteeing that we're going to give you an ROI and we're going to save you X, right? And so you've got to be able to get your message across to an organization in a different way so that you don't sound just like everybody else, right? So what we're doing is we're taking a very pointed approach saying, okay, A, what's the total addressable market in this region? B, who are the organizations facing the biggest challenge and the highest amount of risk? And then how do we message to those people to get in to have conversations with them, right? Sending blind and cold emails no longer works. So you've got to find other ways to do it. So we've very top of the funnel. We've got an account-based marketing strategy we've started about 4 or 5 months ago, where we're starting to build um, campaign pieces and webinars similar to what you and I are doing, and getting people hearing different messaging to get them to lean in and say, "Hey, what is this new strategy these guys are talking about? Maybe it's worth looking at," right? But just trying to take a more targeted approach rather than spray and pray, really kind of narrowing in on what we're looking for and what our actual um, what our best prospect looks like, what are the characteristics, and then focusing on those groups, because if you try to be everything to everybody, it's really hard to get in and start making progress. So we've just taken a real pinpointed approach to looking at what our buyer profile is, and then doubling down and focusing on what those profiles are.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And then I know you mentioned AI, is a part of kind of like the sales process. Where exactly are you guys applying that from a go-to-market perspective, or I guess like the sales cycle perspective? Do you see there's particular areas where it should be applied more, or even not at all?
Yeah, we haven't done much with it yet from a like pure prospecting perspective, like calling agents and things like that. We haven't enabled that yet. We in our CRM we have the ability to start training and doing some things with it, which we're starting to look at and hone in on, but we haven't done any of those things yet. Really, where we're using it on the front end is helping with research, right? So we'll figure out what our ideal client profile is, and then we'll look at the total addressable market and kind of almost suss those two together. And then once we get them, start leveraging AI to do deeper research, because a lot of it's public sector. The information's out there. So you can train it to start finding key data points that we want. So going in, if you open up somebody's budget doc, it could be hundreds of pages, and sifting through that I mean, it's painful and it takes a ton of time, right? So we've started leveraging AI in ways to find key things that we're looking for, data points within that, pull it out, and then go to those organizations and say, "Hey, in doing our research, we found this. This is what your trend looks like. Let me show you some other organizations that were seeing the same trend, and how we changed that trend trajectory, to help them lower costs, save money, and create a better situation for their members," right? So just very targeted messaging, but using AI more on the back end to do some of the research, to help us find those data points and look for the key messaging that we want to put in there.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I guess just final question, and we'll wrap things up. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, does it take a different seller to sell in private SaaS versus like a public or health tech type of solution? If so, like what are some of the attributes that kind of differentiate these two? Yeah, love to hear that kind of perspective.
I mean, here's the short answer, right? Like I think anybody can do it. You have to look at things in a different way. So, like
Mm.
some of the characteristics that it might be better is somebody who's a little more patient, who's detail. I mean, look, salespeople are not generally by trade detail oriented. Like if you do scoring on how detail oriented a salesperson is, it's probably a pretty low score. But but you have to have the discipline to go do the research and find the data to make good messaging. Because again, and I actually think that it crosses over both segments, but it's more important in the government segment, right? Because um, really good salespeople take the time to understand their prospect and build solid messaging to get in the door. But in the public sector, if you don't do that, you just won't get in the door, right? You just can't. And there's so much information out there. So I think, being very detail oriented, being patient, and understanding the buying process, so that you can answer the questions before you get on the phone with them or get on a Zoom call or get in person with them. Okay, I've done the research. I know how they buy. I know who's involved. I know if they have to go to a council or a school board, or if they have to get the unions involved. You can find all that out. You just have to do the research. So I think just somebody who's willing to slow down, find all the information, gather it, put it together, and then be able to deliver it in a way that makes sense, right? I think anybody can do it, but it's just so important and critical on the government side. Whereas on the private sector side, there's so many buying prospects that if you swing and miss, it's like it's just on to the next. In the public sector, especially in a region where there's only a handful of clients that are enterprise level size, you don't have the ability to swing and miss, right? You might have 4 or 5 targets, whereas private sector, you might have 20 or 30 in that same region.
Right.
So you have to be very pinpointed and accurate in how you do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, there should be I'm sure there's an AI solution out there for specifically your guys' industry where it just does a bunch of research or I mean, hey, even Spiky does this, can aggregate some of your calls and you basically understand at a high level after meeting with a particular client, X amount of times, what's kind of next steps there and like what you need to know before entering this next call with this client or coming up for renewal or whatnot. But yeah,
Yeah.
aggregation, I think of insights is like huge for this particular space. So yeah,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I that's pretty much our time right now. I honestly enjoyed this a lot. It was like the insights I learned here were completely different from a lot of the conversations I've had. Like I said, I never had anyone on government and health tech, so it's an interesting space. So thanks so much, Ty. One question I will ask you, and I always ask this with the people I have on the show, is for the next episode, who do you know that would be a great revenue leader to bring on here? And you don't have to have anyone top of mind. You can just email me. But if you do, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear it.
Yeah, I actually have a buddy who I've worked with several times who he's GovTech in the public sector side. His name's Ryan James. And I've worked with him. He's been on my team 2 or 3 different times. I think he's where he's really, really strong is on um, the marketing side of sales and the lead gen side and building out that revenue model on that side of the house. I think he'd be an interesting person for you to have a conversation with.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll reach out to him or maybe get an intro from you. That'd be awesome.
I'll send an intro for you for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, cool. Thanks so much, Ty, for being on the podcast with me.
All right, thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.